That was the most impressive of our bell ringings, I think. Good afternoon. My name is Terry Cannon. I am the Executive Director of the Baseball Reliquary, and on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Reliquary and our national membership, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 16th Annual Induction Day Ceremony for the Shrine of the Eternals. The bell ringing, which has commenced these festivities since 1999, is in tribute to perhaps the most famous fan in baseball history, the late Hilda Chester. As many reliquarians know, each year we try to dig up something new or unusual to add to Hilda's lusty legacy. And this time around, we'd like to offer something a little different. It's a poem entitled Brooklyn 1939 by Marilyn Zuckerman, who has published 5 books of poetry and who has received both the PEN Syndicated Fiction Award and the Allen Ginsberg Poetry Award. This poem was originally published in The Long Islander, a newspaper founded by another baseball fan, Walt Whitman. Not only does the poem take place at Ebbets Field and mention Hilda Chester, but it also represents an expression of the joy baseball often brings into the life of a family. Although Zuckerman has noted that her family was not close, for one thing, her father suffered from being shell-shocked and gassed in World War I. It was their mutual passion for the Dodgers that brought the family joy in dark times. So here's Brooklyn 1939. Walter O'Malley, who has not yet robbed us of Ebbets Field, saves the best seats in the stadium for us, and we go there nights or weekend afternoons the way some families go to church, sitting just behind the Dodger dugout, watching Leo DeRocher drill a hole through an umpire's chest with his forefinger and scream obscenities my father would not stand for from anyone else while Dolph Camilli spits. Pee Wee Reese and Pete Reeser, skinny as bat boys, practice hitting fungos into the outfield. The lights enclose us in a scene sacred as the one in the creche. Hilda, the famous fan, shouting, "Ah, ya bums," christens them while the organ plays a raspberry every time the other team takes the field. My mother, eyes closed, leans out of the box, hands cupped, trying to beat Babe Phelps to the pop fly. He shouts, "Lady, are you crazy or what?" and calls her a bad name. Some afternoons, dawdling home from riding in Prospect Park or from the Albemarle Theater on Flatbush Avenue, I'll stop at every service station, listening for Red Barber's excited drawl, needing to know the score, waiting for Cookie Lavagetto to lift one out of the park. If they win, I'll get a telephone call from Frank or the letter I'm waiting for. If they lose, then sure as rain, I'll flunk chemistry, have no date New Year's Eve, and start a pimple. When I originally contacted Pasadena-based French horn player Link Harnsberger about performing the national anthem and Take Me Out to the Ball Game, I didn't need to make a sales pitch. He immediately and enthusiastically responded by saying, "To see Shoeless Joe and Mark the Bird Fidrich on the same list of inductees speaks volumes." So right off the bat, I knew we had a reliquarian in our midst. And like most reliquarians with the philosophy of the more the merrier, Link said, "How about if I pull together a group of 3 or 4 French horn players?" Voila, the Home Run Horn Quartet. At this time, I would like to ask the audience to please rise as Laura Goodenkoff, Link Harnsberger, Maureen Rochetto McGuire, and Alan Medic present their version of the national anthem, followed by a specially arranged version of Take Me Out to the Ball Game, which was co-arranged by Link Harnsberger. It's called Batter Up. Thank you, Home Run Horn Quartet. Before the 2014 keynote address and the introduction of our distinguished class of inductees, it is my pleasure to introduce the recipients of 2 annual awards presented by the Baseball Reliquary. Leading off, we have the Hilda Award, established in 2001 in memory of Hilda Chester, and created to recognize distinguished service to the game by a baseball fan. It is, we think, an honor of considerable stature, for as baseball fans, the Hilda is our Oscar and our Emmy. It acknowledges our royalty, it symbolizes the best aspects of fandom, and it celebrates the many ways in which we exhibit our love affair with the national pastime. I believe we have one former Hilda recipient in the audience, and that's Emma Amaya. Emma, are you here? Can you stand and take a bow? There she is. Emma actually graced this stage last year. She was the 2013 Hilda recipient, and everybody knows her, of course, as a Dodger fan extraordinaire, and every so often she even dresses up as Hilda Chester. The 2014 Hilda recipient, Jerry Pritikin, became a Chicago Cubs fan in 1945 at the age of 8, when the Cubs were in the World Series. And he begged his father to take him to a game. While his father denied the request, he did promise to take his son the next time the Cubs made it to the series. Well, we know how that turned out. 70 years later, Jerry is still waiting to get to the promised land. Jerry rooted for the Cubs even while in exile in San Francisco, where he worked as a freelance photographer and publicist from the early 1960s until the late 1980s, at which time he moved back to his beloved Chicago and became a regular at Wrigley Field, earning the moniker the Bleacher Preacher for his efforts to convert non-believers to the Cubs. As the Bleacher Preacher, Jerry wore a pith helmet with a solar-powered propeller. His antics included cavorting with a life-sized voodoo doll that would be dressed up in the uniforms of opposing teams, and carrying around handmade signs, including one fashioned after the 10 Commandments, inscribed the 10 Commandments, and another which read, "How do you spell belief? C-U-B-S." As attended well over 1,000 games, Jerry's most memorable one was on May 18, 1947, when he was on hand to see Jackie Robinson's Chicago debut, and he was one of the many fans who brought binoculars that day to get a closer look at the future Hall of Famer and Shrine of the Eternals inductee. Called the #1 Cubs fan by broadcaster Harry Carey, the 77-year-old Jerry Pritikin's receipt of the Hilda Award in 2014 makes a trifecta of sorts, as he was inducted into the Chicago Senior Citizen Hall of Fame in 2012 and the National Gay and Lesbian Sports Hall of Fame in 2013, the latter for excellence and courage as a sports fan, photojournalist, and advocate. An early gay rights activist and close friend of Harvey Milk, Jerry played on gay softball teams for over 30 years, finally hanging up the spikes last year. Among his fondest memories was in 1981 when he got former major leaguer and friend Glenn Burke to strike out swinging on a knuckleball. Jerry regularly played in the annual Chicago Metropolitan Sports Association's Senior Cup softball tournament, receiving the oldest active player award 4 times. We are delighted that Jerry and his brother Alan are able to join us today from the Windy City. As we unveil the 2014 Hilda Award, please give a warm Pasadena welcome to its most deserving recipient, Jerry Pritikin.
Nothing left for me to say. I'm not used to speaking to a crowd. I'm used to yelling at ball players. And I'll give you an idea. I didn't like Lenny Dykstra. So I would say, "Hey, Lenny, this ball is going over your head. just like Sesame Street. I really came here to prepare a speech, but I can't even get to it. I am a little nervous. I'm disappointed in myself. However, I brought a few selection of signs that I've carried. I couldn't bring the big ones with me, but I brought a few of the small ones. And one of the things, of course, was I thought of my dad when he made me that promise to get to the promised land. So this was one of the signs. We've gotten a few outs away from getting there, but we're still waiting. I remember in 1946 hearing the old baseball adage, wait till next year, for the first time. If you've ever been to Wrigley, and I hope it's before they ruin it completely, the announcer for the Cubs used to say the most beautiful ballpark in the world, Bert Wilson. And it was, but unfortunately, lights, skyboxes, yuppies, has kind of changed. But one thing that has been consistent over the year is the winds at Wrigley. And this is my sign, Gone with the Wind. I made the next sign, and I have to look at the date, August 12th of 1994, on the first day of a baseball strike. Ask not what your fans can do for your team, but what your team can do for your fans. Unfortunately, baseball has changed completely. I'm proud of my gay rights activism, and just at the last All-Star game, Commissioner Bud Selig is saying that Major League Baseball is taking on homophobia. And I'm very glad about that. In fact, I even wrote him a letter. I'm used to writing letters to everybody, but I said that he hired Billy Bean, someone I happen to know and played baseball, and also belongs to the same gay sports Hall of Fame that I do, to be the first person to take care of that new department. But I wrote him back, and they said, it's very nice, but how about hiring a fan? Because they're the ones who are an endangered species. This is probably my favorite little sign. How do you spell belief? Everybody, I see a Cub fan out here. C-U-B-S. And unfortunately, Dave let us down. And I know Zim is getting an award tonight. And this was one that was made on the QT. We were getting beat by a couple of touchdowns. It says, I used to sit where the television camera can come from behind, so I made a sign that says, help wanted pitchers, Little League experience or no experience. Call Don or Jim with the Cubs telephone number. One of the worst things that happened in my lifetime was lights at Wrigley Field. And I made this sign, and if you're familiar with it, actually, it took 2 days. They were rained out on the first day, but it's long day's journey into night. Of course, the sign originally said 8-8. I had to change it to 8-9 the next day. This is a proud sign because it's signed by Von Sandberg. And Ron actually sat with me in the bleachers after he retired the first time. He actually retired 2 times. And I got him to sign it. But this was made in 1994, and 10 years later, of course, he was elected into the Hall of Fame. Harry Carey's favorite little tagline was, you can't beat fun at the old ballpark, and I add, providing you can afford it. I've seen a few LA hats out here, and maybe a couple other teams, but I haven't really seen any Cardinal fans. Usually when I walk around and I see a Cardinal fan, I usually say, hey, you got a funny hat on. But my other sign is... I used to think that the baseballs were juiced until we found out it was the ball players. And this is something that I made up when Sosa was very popular in Chicago. I used to be able to change the numbers. And this is when he hit 66, and I made that old Route 66 sign. And let's see, one more sign or two more signs. The fat lady has been singing for Cub fans for over 50 years. Fire the fat lady. And I'm sure you all heard about the Cubs and a thing called the Bartman ball. Well, this sign was, I made two signs because I really thought the Cubs were going me to the promised land. And it's, after Bartman, they lost that game, and the next game they were out of it. And so, no, Virginia, there is no Santa Claus. And getting back to my gay rights activism or whatnot, I don't know if you've seen the movie Milk or whatnot, but oops, he's known primarily for his bullhorn. And if you do a Google, you'll find out that there's only two pictures out there with him and his bullhorn. One, mine, and the other is Sean Penn. So I take that for credit too. And I'm really proud to see such a nice crowd here of baseball fans. And they're the best kind of fan in the world. Thank you very much.
Now I'm gonna, is Jerry, did Jerry arrive? Jerry Cohen? Jerry's right there. Okay, great. Came in on you got here in time then, all right. I think so. All right. Our second award was established in 2002 to recognize individuals for their commitment to the preservation of baseball history. The Tony Salin Memorial Award is named in honor of a great and dearly missed reliquarian, a baseball author, archivist, and researcher who passed away in 2001 at the age of 49. As has been the case for each year since the award's inception, Tony Salin's brother Doug and his good friend Jack Maurer have driven down from San Francisco to Pasadena to be here for the awards presentation. And for the second year, Doug and Jack have been joined by fellow San Franciscan Kim Shuck. And as always, we thank them for taking part in our ongoing celebration of Tony's legacy. And could you stand? And we were talking about the dedication of fans. Tony and Jack and now Kim, they leave about, maybe about 4 in the morning? 6? Well, you must be you're doing over 75 miles an hour. Okay, they leave at 6, they get here and usually stop at Pie and Burger for a hamburger, come over here, have a brief dinner afterwards and head back to San Francisco, and you get back at, maybe 3 in the morning. That's dedication. When the Reliquary's Board of Directors goes about choosing a recipient for the Tony Salin Memorial Award, we always keep in mind Tony's baseball passion, particularly as it pertained to keeping alive and bringing attention to the stories and legacies of the game's forgotten heroes and bygone teams that are largely unknown to the general public. Using this most noble pursuit as our major selection criterion, we believe this year's recipient is especially deserving. The 2014 Salin Award honoree, Jerry Cohen, founded Ebbets Field Flannels in 1988, a Seattle, Washington-based company which manufactures historically inspired athletic apparel ranging from handmade reproductions of vintage flannel baseball jerseys to t-shirts, baseball caps, and even grounds crew jackets and sweatshirts, all made with a high level of craftsmanship and respect for authenticity. Simultaneously, Jerry has been preserving the legacies and stories of obscure teams and leagues of the past that might otherwise have been forgotten. His apparel represents teams from the minor leagues, Negro leagues, the short-lived Federal League of 1914 and 15, and often obscure independent and barnstorming teams like the House of David. The company's handiwork was recently seen on the big screen as Ebbets Field Flannels made all the minor league and Negro League uniforms for 42, the Jackie Robinson biopic. At one time an aspiring rock musician, Cohen was born in Brooklyn the year after the Dodgers left the borough for Los Angeles. His work might best be described as wearable history, and his replicas are meticulously researched and often involve painstaking detective work, because hardly any original garments exist for the teams, and all the photos are black and white. Ebbets Field Flannels currently offers over 400 different historic jerseys, and each one is created using authentic materials with virtually everything crafted in the United States. The same dedication goes into making their authentic ball caps, each of which features wool broadcloth construction and period-style felt lettering or embroidery. We don't follow trends, and we aren't sitting around thinking of how we can create something to fit the current fashion market, notes Cohen. We look at history as our guide, and we see ourselves as archivists and people who are trying to bring things forth out of history and turn it into a living thing as authentically as possible with as little interference from the original thing to the wearable item today. That's not always what gets us the biggest selling product, but I think it's what people respect and like about the brand. Now, I think every diehard baseball fan is thrilled when the latest Ebbets Field Flannels catalog arrives via the U.S. mail and feels that sense of anticipation, wondering what the newest additions will be to Jerry's ongoing historical collection of baseball jerseys and caps. Here's the spring 2014 catalog right here. If you want the sleeveless style flannel jersey popularized by the 1967 Macon Peaches of the Southern League, or perhaps the 1934 Negro National League jersey of the Pittsburgh Crawfords, maybe the greatest group of African-American talent ever assembled on one team, with a roster that included Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, Judy Johnson, and Oscar Charleston. Or maybe you're more inclined to wear the authentic barnstorming jacket with wool body and suede sleeves worn by Babe Ruth during the U.S. tour of Japan in 1934. Whatever your interest, Jerry has them all, and each and every one is handcrafted and manufactured in the United States. As we unveil the 2014 Tony Salin Memorial Award, please join me in welcoming its recipient, Jerry Cohen.
Thank you for that. I think I'm even more nervous than Jerry. Speaking is not my forte. So my staff would probably say I speak too much. I had something planned, but I was just remembering when I was sitting there that I'm often asked what's the first, or who inspired you actually to start the company, and that part is easy. Jackie Robinson and my father. My dad was a diehard Brooklyn Dodger fan, And I got my love of baseball history from him directly when I was very, very young. You know, like a lot of people, when I was a teenager, there was some distance between my dad and I, and we didn't get along that well. Possibly because I was spending most of my time trying to become the next Keith Richards. But I was 16 or 17, and I remember it was Father's Day, and I wanted to do something to try to maybe break the impasse and bridge the distance. And we could always talk about baseball, no matter what else was happening. In those days, you couldn't just go to a store and buy a Brooklyn Dodgers hat. So I had an idea, and what I did is I went to a sporting goods store, and I just bought a blue generic baseball hat, a royal blue hat, took it home, painted the button white, found a lady who did embroidery, and took her a picture of Jackie Robinson and had her embroider the Brooklyn Bee on, and that's what I gave my dad for Father's Day that year. So actually the first reproduction I ever did was many, many years before I started Ebbsfield Finals. Fast forward about 4 decades to last year when I got to do the uniforms for the movie 42, and I was able to take my dad to the premiere in Hollywood. So that was really terrific, kind of coming full circle of the whole thing. I don't want to take more of your time. I'm just going to quote the immortal words of that great baseball sage, Chico Escuela, former New York Met, my team. Baseball has been very, very good to me, and I can only add that I hope in a small way I've been good back. Thanks very much.
One of the most eagerly anticipated speeches delivered at the annual Shrine of the Eternals festivities is the keynote address, and this year's presentation is important in several respects. As some of you know, author and historian Paul Dixon was scheduled to be our 2004 keynote speaker several months ago, but when his wife took a bad fall at home a few weeks ago, necessitating physical therapy, Paul was forced to cancel his plans to fly to Pasadena. In a pinch-hitting assignment that rivals any plate appearance made by 2013 Shrine of the Eternals inductee Manny Mota during his illustrious 20-year big league playing career, Joseph L. Price steps into the batter's box today at the Pasadena Central Library. But this is not just any ordinary at-bat, mind you. This is one that goes into the annals of Baseball Reliquary lore. You see, last year, Joe Price appeared on this very stage to perform his vocal rendition of both the national anthem and Take Me Out to the Ball Game. A year later, he now returns to deliver the keynote address, a back-to-back feat which has never been attempted by any reliquarian, and which will likely be a question someday for a Baseball Reliquary trivia challenge. And you were here to see it in person. Joe Price is the Genevieve S. Connick Professor of Religious Studies at Whittier College. With a doctorate in theology and culture, Joe has taught courses and published numerous essays on the subject of sports and religion. He has also authored and edited books, including From Season to Season, Sports as American Religion, and Rounding the Bases, Baseball and Religion in America. Combining his interests in sports, ritual studies, and music, Joe has sung the national anthem for more than 30 major league games in 20 ballparks throughout the country, including 6 times at both Dodger Stadium and the Big A. In 2011, he spent 5 months during his sabbatical leave singing the anthem on a national tour of 104 minor league ballparks in 40 states. Another example of dedication. In conjunction with Joe Price's keynote address, the Board of Directors of the Baseball Reliquary is pleased to share for the first time publicly, the news that the Reliquary has just entered into an agreement with Whittier College administrators and faculty members to create the Institute for Baseball Studies, the first humanities-based research center of its kind associated with a college or university in the United States. The Reliquary's research collection will form the centerpiece of the Institute for Baseball Studies, which has been established to foster an intellectual community for creating and supporting interdisciplinary research and studies related to the cultural significance of baseball in American history. The Institute, which will be located on the third floor of the Mendenhall Building, Whittier College's central administration facility, will be accessible to students, scholars, and the general public, and a formal opening is planned for later this year. Joe Price and yours truly will serve as co-directors of the Institute for Baseball Studies. I would also like to acknowledge the presence today in our audience of Charlotte Borst, the Vice President of Academic Affairs at Whittier College, and express our appreciation for her vision and leadership in helping to get the Institute for Baseball Studies onto the playing field. Thank you, Charlotte. If you stand. There you are. We will soon be sharing more details as this exciting new project is about to launch. But to bring our focus back to today's festivities, please welcome to the lectern to deliver the Shrine of the Eternals 2014 keynote address, the co-director of the Institute for Baseball Studies, Joe Price.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be able to pinch hit rather than pinch sing today. Our presence here today suggests that we share the experience of the allure and power of baseball to forge and to frame our lives. Certainly, baseball has directed much of my daily attention from earliest childhood through last night's Angels' loss at Anaheim. I made it through 10 innings. Baseball began to exert its force on me as early as October 9th, 1956. That morning, I read in the Jackson, Mississippi Clarion Ledger that the previous day, Don Larson had pitched a perfect game against the Brooklyn Dodgers. As a preacher's kid, I understood reality in terms of the sermons that I heard at least 3 times a week from my father's pulpit. Because I religiously embraced the ideal of perfection, and because already I believed that baseball would be big for me, I immediately resolved to follow the Yankees, something that Southern boys aren't supposed to do. So throughout grade school summers, I often spent humid afternoons twisting the AM dial to fine-tune reception for Mutual Radio's Game of the Day, frequently featuring the Yankees. And on Saturday afternoons, I'd often bike to Bubba's house to watch the Game of the Week with him and to hear old Diz drawl like us, inimitably describing a runner who had slud into third, and eventually crooning the Wabash Cannonball. At Busch Stadium in 1960, I finally witnessed my first major league game. The popcorn holder, if only souvenirs were so durable and cheap these days. Ernie Broglio pitched and Stan Musial homered in the Cards' 2-1 win over Bob Friend, Roberto Clemente, and the soon-to-be World Series champion Pittsburgh Pirates. The following year, I made a pilgrimage with my father to Chicago to see the Yankees split weekend games with the White Sox at Old Comiskey Park. On Friday night, Mantle, batting right-handed against Juan Pizarro, hit a home run for the Yankees' lone run in a 6-1 loss. And the following afternoon, the Yankees' starting lineup uniquely featured 3 catchers in the starting lineup: Berra in left, Howard at first, and Blanchard behind the plate. The scorecard from that day is accurate. Maris laced one of his unblemished 61 in his second at-bat. Howard launched a drive over the left field roof, and Bob Cerv pinch hit a tying homer to lead off the 9th after Maris had nailed Louis Aparicio at home in the bottom of the 8th. Maris, whose arm was really as good as his swing, had 2 assists that afternoon in the Yankees' 9-8 victory in 10 innings. A succinct analysis of my experience is captured in a single sentence years later by Boston Globe journalist Stephen Stark, who averred that instead of a bar mitzvah or confirmation, seeing Mickey Mantle bat or playing catch with Dad could become the seminal experience in life. Indeed, in the lives of many fans, other rites of passage than those of adolescence can connect with baseball. Given my historic passion for the Yankees, it should not be surprising that in the birthing center for my first child, I recited the Yankees lineup while gently splashing water on him during the Lavoie bath. While Albinoni's Adagio and G soothed most in the room, I invoked the names of Thurman Munson, Chris Chambliss, even Billy Martin. To what effect? My son became a Cubs fan. And to complete my family's rebellion against the imperialistic tendencies of the Yankees, my younger son eventually fell in love with Mike Greenwell and the Boston Red Sox. Although my invocation of the Yankees roster at my son's birth might be unique, baseball has often shaped significant life ceremonies associated with marriage, retirement, and death. In the film Bull Durham, Jimmy and Millie wed on the pitcher's mound. In history, and more pertinent to today, Don and Soot Zimmer married at the ballpark in Elmira, New York. I might note that year, freshly empowered by his marriage, Don slugged 9 home runs to lead the Pioneers. In a more recent year, the magazine Modern Bride has promoted Minute Maid Park in Houston for its distinct nuptial ambiance. Rites of retirement and memorials have often also been held at ballparks. Among the noteworthy ceremonies commemorating players' careers are Major League Baseball's retirement of Jackie Robinson's number 42 on the 50th anniversary of his first Major League appearance. And while the series of eulogies for Lou Gehrig 75 years ago bore all the mournful marks of a wake, ballparks have actually hosted funereal rituals. The memorial service for LA Times sports columnist Jim Murray was held at Dodger Stadium. The ashes for Eddie Elner's grandmother were strewn along the first base line at Yankee Stadium. And to honor songwriter Steve Goodman, who composed A Dying Cub Fan's Last Request, his cremains were interred beneath home plate at Wrigley Field. Now, obviously, your lives and mine are not the only ones that have been framed from birth to death by baseball. 2 decades ago, former Sports Illustrated editor Ron Femright asked several distinguished authors to write about how and why they had become fervent baseball fans. In part, Femright was fascinated by the fact that baseball images and its heroes often configured their fictional worlds. Drawing from the depths of their childhood memories, Femright's authors constructed their memoirs around their love of baseball, which early had stimulated their curiosity for geography, where teams were located, history, the background and records of players, and math, the need to understand batting averages, slugging percentages, and the mystical computation ERA, which is mystical because it's base 9, not base 10. In his essay, Anthony Lucas recalls how the dark world of his family's dysfunction lurked beneath the public profile of their contentment. Eventually, his mother committed suicide, and subsequently his father suffered from alcoholism. It is with little wonder, then, Lucas writes, that I retreated whenever possible into that other world of imaginary playmates, where bumblebee princes soared to the stars. I was in search of a realm which made more sense than this one, a place in which beauty and virtue and talent were rewarded not by pain and death, but by the love and approbation that they deserved. It was then that I found baseball. Having experienced isolation and desolation, Lucas sought solace and security in the world of baseball. Simply, it liberated him by redeeming the promise of hope and by revealing a realm where justice prevails since umpires enforce the rules. His situation was like that of Gil Renard, the pathological Giants fan. Aren't they all? Gil Renard, who was portrayed by Robert De Niro in The Fan. Baseball is better than life, Renard concluded, because it's fair. Or as the poet Donald Hall has put it, baseball provides a momentary grace of order that lends joy and attention and affection to otherwise tedious and separate lives. Such was certainly the case for the anxious, youthful Lucas, whose home world had imploded. Unable to exercise power over his environment, Lucas latched on to the Yankees, who seemed able to control their own destiny. Remarkably, by some alchemy of fandom, he shared their victories while they became his surrogate family. Similarly, in her book about growing up in the 1950s in baseball-rich New York, Doris Kearns Goodwin reflects on a different bonding prospect of baseball. At age 6, she met 8-year-old Johnny, a devout Dodger fan who knew even more about the Dodgers than she herself. For the first time, she recognized the invisible community of baseball that reached beyond the block, her own block, to the town where Johnny lived. Years later, as an adult traveling throughout the country, she found that Dodgers fans, indeed all baseball fans, shared communal bonds extending across racial, social, and generational lines. And she discovered that, in her own words, there is nothing like that inspires camaraderie like sharing a victory not only of a game, but of a season. Like Lucas and Kearns Goodwin, Jonathan Yardley grasps the mythic impact of baseball. Memory is fallible, he muses, but does it matter? Are the specifics all that important? Not really, he concludes. The indisputable fact is that Yardley's love affair with baseball began in the summer of 1948 when his father took him by train to New York to see a doubleheader between the Yankees and the St. Louis Browns. Yardley now figures that the trip must have required a major paternal sacrifice because his father fully abhorred baseball. Yardley concedes, at least I think it was a doubleheader. It must have been a doubleheader because my private mythology insists upon it, insists that my father, who so hated sports, so loved his son, that he was willing to sit through 2 whole baseball games in order to make him happy. What if it was just a single game? What if we stayed only 5 innings? What shabby raw material would I then have been given from which to fabricate what has become one of the central legends of my life? I'd rather not know. I've resisted all impulses to search out the occasion in the newspaper files of seasons past. Certainly, baseball memories can exert a formative power on one's life, even when verifiable events might be imperfectly recalled or even if intentionally reconstrued. In this regard, the poet Robert Creamer acknowledges indifference about some specifics related to his first game at the Polo Grounds, an afternoon that featured a doubleheader between the Giants and Dodgers. I can't remember if one team swept both games or if the doubleheader was split, he admits. It didn't seem to matter. I wasn't rooting for either the Giants or the Dodgers. All I was doing was absorbing the wonder of Major League Baseball, inning after inning, sucking in details that have never left me. I think I am correct in saying that I adored, not loved, but adored, as though they were gods, every man on the altar of that field. For Creamer, like Yardley, the deep memories of baseball crystallize the alchemy of fandom. And celebrating this magical devotion to baseball and its heroes, Yardley concludes, as do I, with these words. If God in mysterious wisdom has chosen you to be a baseball fan, you can't just walk away from it whenever you decide to get serious. You're stuck for life. And for me, I'm not complaining. Thank you very much.
And now it is time to commence with the induction of our 2014 electees to the Shrine of the Eternals and the unveiling and presentation of the inductee plaques. The 3 individuals that we honor today were elected by the membership of the Baseball Reliquary in voting conducted in April, and they received the highest number of votes from a ballot consisting of 50 candidates. 2 identical plaques have been assembled in honor of each inductee, one which is presented to the inductee or representative of the inductee, and one which becomes part of the permanent collection of the Baseball Reliquary and which is used for exhibition purposes. In addition to the plaque, each inductee will receive a certificate of commendation from the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors for their outstanding career in baseball. The certificates are personally signed by Michael D. Antonovich, Los Angeles County Supervisor for District 5, which includes Pasadena. And I have one of the certificates here. And this is what they look like, right here. And they read as follows. In recognition of dedicated service to the affairs of the community and for the civic pride demonstrated by numerous contributions for the benefit of all the citizens of Los Angeles County. Our first inductee, J. Hannah Dizzy Dean, will be introduced by John Schulian, one of the great wordsmiths of this or any other era. John Schulian has ventured from newspapers and magazines to Hollywood and back again. He worked as a sports columnist in Chicago and Philadelphia and was one of the creators of TV's Xena Warrior Princess, and was also a special contributor to Sports Illustrated. His prose has been included in numerous anthologies, including the Best American Sports Writing and Sports Illustrated's 50 Years of Great Writing. He was a sports commentator for National Public Radio and has written about sports and popular culture for GQ, the New York Times, and the Los Angeles Times. His books have included Twilight of the Long Ball Gods, Dispatches from the Disappearing Heart of Baseball, and Sometimes They Even Shook Your Hand, Portraits of Champions Who Walked Among Us. John is so revered by his fellow writers in the sports world that it's very easy to find words of praise about his columns and longer narrative pieces from a myriad of journalists. But one of my favorites is from author John Ed Bradley, who remarked, "I've often wondered if the subjects of his stories realized how privileged they were to have him telling their tales. Great ball players come and go, but there has been only one Schulian." Of course, on the same note, there has been only one Dizzy Dean, and I am quite confident that had old Diz been alive today, he would have been delighted to have his induction into the Shrine of the Eternals introduced by John Schulian. Following John's introduction, we will unveil Dizzy's plaque, and I will read brief acceptance remarks from Sandy Dean, the nephew of Dizzy Dean, on behalf of the Dean family. Originally, well, I'll mention about that when I get to the acceptance remarks. So please welcome John Schulian.
By the shore, she's mighty tall and handsome, she's known quite well by all. She's a combination of the Wabash Cannonball. Listen to the dingo.
Old Diz could carry a tune, couldn't he? Thank you for having me. Dizzy Dean was baseball's one-man free speech movement. There were big names with untamed mouths before him, of course, Babe Ruth being the obvious example. But the Babe was only too happy to take time out for the occasional cigar, hot dog, bootleg cocktail, and available maiden. Dizzy, on the other hand, started talking the day he signed his first professional contract for a whopping $300 a month, and didn't stop until he drew his final breath. Upon meeting Branch Rickey, the architect of the St. Louis Cardinals gas house gang, he announced, "I'm the fellow that's going to win you a lot of ball games." He set about proving his point as soon as he hit St. Lou, celebrating every victory by hanging out taxi cab windows and hollering at strangers on the street, "I'm the great Dean. Got anything you want me to sign?" He went one step further when he visited a children's hospital and promised that he'd strike out the New York Giants' Bill Terry, a future fellow Hall of Famer. And strike Terry out he did, a feat he underscored by uttering a line that would take on new life when Muhammad Ali and Broadway Joe Namath began beating their chests. "It ain't bragging if you can do it." The sports writers of the 1930s flocked to Dizzy, which was a surprise because they generally considered it beneath their dignity to converse with the roughnecks they covered for a living. But here was a mesmerizing presence, a raw-boned, unfiltered character who seemed to have strolled from the imagination of Ring Lardner. Somehow every writer who came along got a different story about how Dizzy grew up as a sharecropper's son and played catch with his brother Paul, a.k.a. Daffy, using baseballs that were nothing more than rocks wrapped in yarn from an old sock. Dizzy's given name was J. Hannah Dean, but he sometimes told writers it was Jerome Herman Dean, in a memory of a cousin who drowned in a swimming hole. And that nickname of his, he claimed he got it in the Army when a sergeant caught him throwing potatoes at a garbage can lid and screamed, "What the hell you think you're doing, you dizzy son of a bitch?" There were other versions of the story, though not as many as there were places he said he'd been born. It was one for this writer and one for that writer, and so on down the line. "You're going to run out of states south of the Mason-Dixon line pretty soon," Leo DeRocher, the Cardinals shortstop, warned him. "They got a story to write, partner," Dizzy said. "I'm big news now. If I give this one the same story, what's there left for him to write? It ain't news." According to the available evidence, Dizzy was born to Alma and Albert Dean on January 16, 1910, in Lucas, Arkansas. He was a Capricorn, the Baseball Almanac dutifully points out. The family drifted through the South and Southwest, working hard scrabble farms and not paying much attention to book learning for the boys. You get some idea of what their life was like when you listen to Billy Joe Shaver, a singer and songwriter from Texas who dipped into his own experience for these lyrics. "I got all my country learning, milking and a churning, picking cotton, raising hell, and baling hay." There was, however, a way off the farm for lads weary of staring at the backside of a mule. It was baseball, which Jimmy Breslin, the legendary New York columnist, described as a sport for hillbillies with great eyesight. It's an observation that conjures up images of milk-fed young brutes hitting line drives that dented the tin outfield wall in Philadelphia's old Baker Bowl, and of Hack Wilson, the Chicago Cubs' bibulous slugger, sobering up before games in a tub of ice water tended by a young fellow named Bill Veck. Dizzy's job as a pitcher was to knock the thunder and lightning out of the opposition's big bats. He claimed to have everything he needed for the job: a good body, a strong arm, and a weak mind. Untroubled by self-analysis, he would have a brilliant but star-crossed career as a pitcher who feared no hitter and wound up nailed to a cross of bum's luck. He won 18 games for the Cardinals as a rookie in 1932, and then reeled off 4 straight 20-victory seasons, the highlight of them being the 30 wins he racked up in 1934. No National League pitcher has won that many games in a single season in the post-dead ball era, or had as much fun, or riled up quite as many people when he wasn't winning hearts and minds among the rest of the populace. It was Dizzy Dean, more than anyone else, who put the gas in the Gas House Gang. Some call the gang the second greatest team ever, surpassed only by the 1927 Yankees. But Leo DeRocher, always honest, seldom kind, even when the subject was his old ball club, went to his grave saying there were a dozen or more teams better than the Gashousers. But the scrappiest, rowdiest, brawlingest team ever, the team that seemed to have been put together just to give depression-stricken America a band of underdogs to root for, now there you could make a case for the Gas House Gang. Their nicknames alone offered a kind of escapist poetry to the hard luck cases riding the rails and seeking out soup kitchens. Rip Collins at first base, Frankie Frisch, the Fordham Flash, at second, Leo the Lip at short, Pepper Martin, the wild horse of the Osage, at third, Ducky Joe Medwick in left field, and of course the Dean brothers, Dizzy and Daffy, on the mound. They slid head first and sang country music, crashed into walls, and came up swinging at the slightest provocation. Medwick fought Detroit's Marv Owen right there at third base in the 1934 World Series. Why not? He'd already fought just about everybody on his own team. He knocked one Cardinals pitcher cold, and when Dizzy accused him of being less than energetic in pursuit of a fly ball that fell for a base hit, Medwick decided to flatten the loquacious pitcher too. Daffy Dean leaped to his feet, ready to aid Dizzy in combat. So Medwick grabbed a bat and invited the brothers to meet their doom together. Hard as it is to believe, Cooler heads ultimately prevailed. But in the grand baseball tradition, red asses remained the order of the day for the Gas House Gang, and no one's ass was redder than Dizzy's when the Giants had the audacity to score 7 runs off him in an inning. His response was a commentary on the way baseball was played then. He told the Giants he was going to hit every dad blasted one of them, and then he did it. The umpire didn't throw him out of the game. No hitter charged the mound. It was just baseball's rough justice at work. If a hitter dug in too deeply at the plate, down he went. If the opposition scored too many runs or even had the nerve to hit the ball too hard for a pitcher's liking, bang, he got drilled. Still, the 8th Giant to come to the plate that fateful inning, who else but Bill Terry, couldn't resist looking out at the mound to see if 7 was enough for Dizzy. "You're no better than the rest of them," Dizzy shouted. "Get up there because you're going to get yours too." Then there was the day he bet he'd strike out the Boston Braves' unfortunate Vince DiMaggio 4 times. Dizzy blew him away the first 3 and was working on number 4 when DiMaggio somehow managed to hit a foul pop-up. It was an easy play for the Cardinals catcher, but Dizzy ran off the mound hollering, "Drop it, drop it." Dizzy did, or the catcher did. On the next pitch, Dizzy won his bet. His self-confidence fed his own mythology, never more so than in '34, when he pitched 8 hitless innings against the Brooklyn Dodgers in the first game of a doubleheader and finished with a 3-hit shutout. In the nightcap, Brother Paul pitched the masterpiece that had eluded Dizzy. "Gee, Paul," Dizzy said in the locker room, "if I'd have known you was going to throw a no-hitter, I'd have throwed one too." Those 2 victories gave the brothers 45 combined for the season, which was what Dizzy had predicted for them. There was one problem, though. The season wasn't over. The Cardinals were in a blood, sweat, and tears pennant race with the Giants that wouldn't be settled until Dizzy shut out Cincinnati with 3 games to go, and Daffy came back to beat the Reds the next day, boosting the Dean's win total for the season to 49. For once, Dizzy had underestimated himself. All the Gas House Gang had to do after that was beat Detroit in the World Series. The Tigers were built on the muscle of Hank Greenberg, Goose Goslin, Charlie Gehringer, and Mickey Cochran. So it seemed only fitting that Frisch would want to share the scouting reports on them with his team. That's what managers do. But he wasn't halfway through before Dizzy stood up and said, "What the hell are you going over the hitters for? They're not going to get any hits off me." Yes, they were. They even beat Dizzy once and hit him in the noggin with a throw when he was trying to break up a double play, an episode immortalized by a newspaper headline that said, "X-ray of Dean's head reveals nothing." He got the last laugh, though, by beating the Tigers twice. Paul did the same, and the Gas House Gang ruled the world of baseball. They might have become a dynasty if the team's owners had listened to Dizzy. He had, what was for his time, a wild idea about 2 players the Cardinals should sign, a pitcher and a catcher, Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson. Dizzy had barnstormed with them in the off-season, and he had seen their greatness up close. Greatness was all that mattered to him. He was a pragmatist. Dizzy didn't care that Satch and Josh were black and he and his teammates were white. He was a pragmatist, plain and simple. If we sign them, he said, we'll wrap up the pennant by the 4th of July and we can go fishing until the World Series. Dizzy never got his wish, though, and the Gas House Gang's failure to make it to another series became the moral of the story. The Fates began to abandon Dizzy in the 1937 All-Star Game, when Earl Averill, the Cleveland Indians slugger, hit a line drive off his left foot. The doctor told him his big toe was fractured. "Fractured hell," Dizzy said. "The damn thing's broken." Trooper that he was, he came back too soon. And when he changed his pitching delivery to ease the pain in his foot, he injured his arm. The next thing he knew, he had a sore right arm that took the fire out of his fastball and ended his streak of 20-win seasons forever. P.K. Wrigley, the owner of the Cubs, insisted on signing him for the 1938 season anyway. These weren't the Cubs who have put the trademark on futility since then. The Cubs, who years later would give away Lou Brock to get, it's still hard to believe this, Ernie Broglio. They would secure their grip on the pennant when Gabby Hartnett hit his homer in the Gloamin' and broke the Pittsburgh Pirates' hearts. But they wouldn't have been in a position to do so if Dizzy hadn't pitched a 2-1 masterpiece the day before. He called it the greatest performance of his career, but it didn't reverse his downward spiral. A World Series loss to the Yankees, a meager 6 wins in 1939, and one, his last in the big leagues, in 1940. A year later, he was out of baseball at age 31. There was nothing left for him to do but talk. All right, he sang too. It took almost no urging at all to get him to belt out that old Roy Acuff hit, the Wabash Cannonball. But mostly people wanted to hear Dizzy make ball games sound, as one writer put it, like stories from Mark Twain. He spoke his own language, whether he was doing the play-by-play for the St. Louis Browns on the radio or the CBS Game of the Week on TV. When a player's name was a mouthful, Dizzy usually pronounced it as though a Las Vegas blackjack dealer was parked on his tongue, shuffling the letters. Case in point, Joey Amalfitano, when he was an infielder with the Giants.
Amy told you a beautiful afternoon for baseball here at Pasadena in Cincinnati. How? Joe Montano. These things off up there as we start the ball game. Come, Joe Montano across the plate for the first run of the ball game. Out Montano scores from second base to put the Giants out in front 1-0. Joe Montano. The second sacker up there with the count of 1 ball and no strike.
The fourth time is a charm. Mangled names were but one of Dizzy's oratorical flourishes. In his world, a right-handed pitcher who threw sidearm was coming by way of Port Arthur, thereby giving that Texas oil town a measure of fame before it became known as Janis Joplin's birthplace. Al Zarilla, a Browns outfielder, didn't slide into third base, he slud. A hitter who swung at a bad pitch, as if the Browns had any other kind of hitter, shouldn't have had ought to swang. Dizzy was equally blunt on CBS, once saying, "I don't know why they're calling this the game of the week. There's a much better game, Dodgers and Giants, over on NBC." And of course, there was the staple of seemingly every sentence that tumbled from his mouth, on the air and off, ain't. He drove English teachers crazy with it, and when one wrote to complain, he used the broadcast booth as his bully pulpit. A lot of folks who ain't saying ain't eating. So teach, you learn them English, and I'll learn them baseball. The Browns pitchers and their loving wives weren't any happier than the English teachers when Dizzy said on the air in 1947, "Doggone, I don't know what this game's a-comin' to. I swear I could beat 9 out of 10 guys that call themselves pitchers nowadays." To silence the cries of outrage, the Browns management signed Dizzy to a $1 contract to pitch the final game of the season. His fastball was a memory, but he still shut out the Chicago White Sox for 4 innings and got a base hit too, before he pulled a muscle in his leg and left the game to the cheers of the very people he'd made so angry. The Browns went on to lose their 95th game of the season, while Dizzy retired to the broadcast booth for keeps. "It's a good thing that muscle I pulled wasn't in my throat," he said. If ever someone was born to be in the shrine of the Eternals, It is Dizzy Dean, pitcher, broadcaster, singer, clown prince, hillbilly philosopher. The only regret raised by his induction is that it comes 40 years after his death, and in the 14th year since the shrine began saluting the free spirits and relentless crusaders who one way or another changed baseball for the better. So it is that you can't help wondering what Dizzy would say if he were to step up here and accept his award for being Dizzy. Listen closely now. There he is. Hear him? He's saying, "What took you so long?" Thank you.
Originally, Sandy Dean, who is the son of Dizzy's brother Paul, was planning to fly to Pasadena from his home in Hot Springs, Arkansas, to accept the induction in person. However, he coaches his grandson's Little League baseball team, and they are playing this weekend in a state tournament in Arkansas. So we'll let Sandy off the hook on this one, since his reason for not being here is baseball related. He did send the following brief statement, which he asked me to share today. I want to thank everyone who voted for Diz to be inducted into the Shrine of the Eternals. He was blessed with God-given talent of throwing a baseball. He said when he would deliver a pitch, he felt it was hitting the catcher's mitt as soon as the ball left his hand. He was once asked if he thought he was the greatest pitcher ever. He replied, "I may not have been the greatest, but I was amongst them." On behalf of Diz and the Dean family, I would like to thank you all again for allowing his legacy to live on. Our second inductee is Don Zimmer. His induction will be accepted by Jean Soot Zimmer, who was married to Don for 62 glorious years in what was surely one of baseball's greatest love stories. Don Zimmer's induction will be introduced by Mark Langell, who works for the Los Angeles Dodgers in the capacity of publications editor and team historian. A graduate of California State University Northridge with a degree in journalism, Mark has authored several books about the history of the Dodgers, including Game of My Life Dodgers, Memorable Stories of Dodgers Baseball, and Images of Baseball, Dodger Stadium. Mark's first journalistic job was just a few blocks from here when he worked for the Pasadena Star-News for several years in the late 80s and early 90s, covering the Dodgers as a beat reporter. So today, Mark has returned to his old stomping grounds. To introduce the induction of Don Zimmer into the Shrine of the Eternals, please welcome Mark Langell.
Thank you very much, Terry. Whenever I give a speech, I have to make sure that people understand that the phrase team historian is actually a real job. A lot of people just sort of think I'm making that up, and that's actually a title, and people wonder, they hear about the degree, and sometimes I get too much credit for the scholarly background. They say, how does one become a team historian? And the answer is very easy. If you don't hit the ball in Little League, you're well on your way to being a team historian. So as a washed-up athlete at age 7, I salute all of you, and it's a pleasure to be here. And, you know, thinking about Don Zimmer, the thing that comes to mind most of all is Kirk Gibson's home run in the 1988 World Series. And you may wonder, well, what does Don Zimmer have to do with the Dodgers beating Oakland in this theatrical home run, bottom of the ninth inning, 1988? And if you go around the tape, you know, everybody knows what happens, a 3-2 pitch from Dennis Eckersley, and he just puts it into the pavilion, and everybody goes crazy, and he's limping around the bases, and he's got the one arm in the air. But if you put the tape back just a little, he hits a little foul ball up the first base line, and it barely goes foul. Barely. Just by about that much did Kirk Gibson come from grounding out to first base. And he made the most of that second chance. And second chance is what I think about Don Zimmer, because if you think about all the images that we've known about Don Zimmer over the years, you can think about him as a Dodger ball player later in his career with other teams. You can think of him as a coach. You can think of him as a manager. You can think of him as Joe Torre's bench coach. You can think of him as a certain sparring partner for a Boston Red Sox pitcher. And I should be more specific, not Bill Lee, but Pedro Martinez. But the thing I think about most of all is when you look back, when he was a minor leaguer in that time in 1953, when he's laying in a hospital bed and he's been struck in the head. And, you know, the Reliquary in the past has celebrated the great works of Frank Jobe, who was able to save the career of a pitcher with a bad shoulder, save the career of this and save the career of that. And if you think back to this time in 1953, forget the fact about saving his career. Don Zimmer's life was saved, literally, after being struck in the head. And there was pressure put on his skull as far as the holes that were bored, and to be able to take the pressure off. And about a week and a half later, he suddenly wakes up and he thinks the ball game was played the day before. And so Don Zimmer definitely made the most of that second chance. And the way Don Zimmer attacked life and attacked baseball and attacked everything else, it might not have been a second chance, or might have been a third chance, a fourth chance, a fifth chance. But that moment in 1953 was what I thought about most when the news about Don's passing. You think of everything that he accomplished and the bravery that he had to endure at that plate. And he was even beamed a couple years later and just kept popping up. Now, Don Zimmer would frequently come back to the Southern California area for various reunions. When you have that long of a baseball career, you're going to be invited back for reunions. He came back in 1955 when the Dodgers celebrated their first and only championship. But the one I most remember was the one that he wasn't attending, and that was 1959. Because the Dodgers in 2009 were going to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the 1959 championship team. And there was a morning at the Coliseum when a group of 10 former Brooklyn Dodgers came out. The ringleader was Duke Snider, and the tone of that morning was set by Duke suddenly telling stories, and they weren't about himself. It was, remember when Zim, ... remember this, remember that, and somehow Don Zimmer was always the center of these stories. And the first story that he told was, remember when Zim challenged me to that throw? And what he meant by that throw was, what do ball players do when you're at the Coliseum? It's a lousy year, it's 1958, the team's not really going anywhere. So you're talking with your teammate, and hey, Duke, you think you could throw a ball out of the Coliseum? Oh, I guess I could. I got a strong arm. And this is what they're talking about during batting practice. And so it's decided that Duke's going to throw the ball out of the Coliseum, and Zimmer's going to collect all the money and take the bets. And so one day, Snyder's going to throw the ball out, and he does it on a couple attempts, and it doesn't work. And finally, the third time, pop. And Duke hurt himself. So, well, it's a happy ending. Don't worry. So, he can't play the next day. Now, later on that morning, it's 50 years later, they go into the locker room at the Coliseum. And the Rams also play there along with college football. And so these are big lockers. And the next Remember When story was Duke Snider recalling the great moment when Don Zimmer was hiding from his manager, Walter Alston, by going into the locker and closing the door from behind and being as quiet as possible while Alston is in the middle of a tirade. Where's Zimmer? Where's Zimmer? Where is he? I know he did it. And Duke and everybody else are just beside themselves because he doesn't know that he's just probably hiding in something like this. And the whole time, Don Zimmer is just there as quiet as a mouse, waiting for the Alston storm to pass. And it does have a happy ending because at the end of the season, they decide that the team's still not going anywhere. Buzzy Bavasi rescinds the fine, and so on the last day of the season, Duke decides to try it anyway, even though he got in trouble, and he throws the ball out of the Coliseum. So it has a happy ending, and 50 years later, all they could talk about was Zimmer the ringleader and Duke's bad arm and pointing to that locker where he was just as quiet as a mouse, and Alston never knew that the perpetrator was hiding right there in front of him, maybe 10 feet away. Duke was just saying, he was right there, he never even knew. And they're just laughing the whole time. Don didn't even have to be there to be the center of attention. Well, when Don passed away, it was time to find the proper picture, because with all the attention, what would be a good picture to show of Don Zimmer as a Brooklyn Dodger? And inside the file was the photo that you see on your program as far as Don, the beginning of his career. And there were some other things too. A ball player's file normally has things like press releases and statistics and things like that. And Don Zimmer's file was kind of unique because not only did it have this unique picture, but it also had some other things. And you heard about the famous ballpark wedding, and there was a mimeographed sheet, and it was a form letter. And it was very odd to see this. It wasn't really a baseball form, but this is actually a form letter dated July the 26th, 1951. And somehow there was a committee to be able to gather gifts for the couple. And this would be the co-chairman of the Don Zimmer's fan committee, basically going to the local businesses, trying to get gifts for the new couple. And we are endeavoring to show our appreciation to Don for his loyalty and great team spirit as a member of the 1951 Pioneer Baseball Club by assisting in making his wedding a grand success. We feel that all fans are interested in this aim, as we are hence presenting to you, that would be the business owner that doesn't know what's coming, this opportunity to join us in offering to Don's bride, who is a stranger here, a real example of our area's hospitality. Now, how's that for a sales pitch? I had no idea if Don was in on trying to get gifts for the wedding, but this is just amazing as a business letter. Finally, the last paragraph. Should you care to join us in building up a veritable treasure of wedding gifts for Don and his bride, we would be more than glad to have your valued cooperation. So in the middle of all the statistics, the photos, and everything like that, here is a minor league solicitation letter to try to get more presents for the Don Zimmer wedding. And the other neat piece is the actual invitation to the wedding. But it wasn't necessarily an invitation to the wedding because you had to have a ticket for the ball game. So this was an invite for the reception. And so Jean Carroll and Mr. Donald, on Thursday the 16th of August, 1951, at 11 o'clock in the evening, Mark Twain Hotel, Elmira, New York. And so this always stayed in the player personnel file, and there had to have been a reason, and obviously there was a good reason, because this was very important to not only Don's career, but Don's life. And so on behalf of the Dodger organization, it is a pleasure and it's an honor to present and to call up here for the Baseball Reliquary, Shrine of the Eternals, to Jean Carroll, or you may know her as Soot, Zimmer. That was in this file.
I have. I've got over 70 scrapbooks, and I've got them all. It's down a little short. Thank you very much on behalf of Don for being elected into the Shrine of the Eternals. Now, when we got the letter, I didn't know what reliquary meant. Do you all know what it means? I looked it up in the dictionary, and it said a receptacle for a relic. And I thought, I said, I knew we were old, but I didn't know we were relics. He would be thrilled to be going in with the other recipients. 2 stories. One really about Jackie, although I know Rachel. And happy birthday, Rachel. I know that's why she's not here, right? When Jackie retired, he went to work for Chuck Full of Nuts. And Don got to play with Jackie. Not many of them left, I don't think. But anyway, he called Don in the off season and he said, I'm going to be down in the Tampa Bay area, get us a golf game. My husband was so thrilled to get that phone call. I have a picture in the entrance of our condo of Jackie and Don with their putters, like they show a golf, picture. And everyone that ever came or has come to our condo sees that picture of he and Jackie. And then a little Dizzy story. When Dizzy did the game of the week, I don't know if you remember, Gene Kirby, the late Gene Kirby was the producer. He retired down in Florida and he's since passed. But we went out to eat with him many times, and every time he'd have another Dizzy story. 3/4 of the ones that you told, I've heard those before because Gene loved Dizzy and they had a great time doing that game of the week. Now, I'm not going to say anymore because I'll start crying. Thank you again for being so nice to Don. He would have been here, but he just left a little soon, and I keep saying he's on another road trip. And and he went on a few in 66 seasons. So thank you very much.
Our third and final inductee, Rachel Robinson, will be introduced by a longtime reliquarian, Peter Dreyer. Following acceptance remarks by Delano Robinson, we were originally going to have Dr. Hadley Marie Robinson perform a musical selection in honor of Rachel's induction. However, she has come down with a minor back problem, but the family has asked that Betty J. Ford perform a musical selection on piano. So following Dell's remarks, we'll remove the chairs and bring the piano out, and Betty J. Ford will join us to conclude the induction of Rachel Robinson. Peter Dreyer is the Dr. E.P. Clapp Distinguished Professor of Politics and Director of the Urban and Environmental Policy Program at Occidental College in Los Angeles. In addition to writing and lecturing widely on American politics and public policy, Peter has written about baseball's integration and Jackie Robinson, devoting a chapter to the baseball great and 2005 Shrine of the Eternals inductee in his book, The 100 Greatest Americans of the 20th Century, a Social Justice Hall of Fame. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome to the lectern, Peter Dreyer.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you all for being here. I'm, as Terry said, a longtime reliquarian, and it's a thrill to be here. And I want to tell you a little bit about Rachel. It's a real privilege to be asked to introduce the induction of Rachel Robinson into the shrine. and it'll be accepted, as Terry said, by Delano Robinson, Rachel's sister-in-law, and a longtime Pasadena resident. Rachel Robinson was voted into the shrine the first time she was on the ballot, which is itself a feat, and her entry completes the cycle about baseball's battle against segregation. Jackie Robinson, Josh Gibson, and Lester Rodney, who was the sports editor of the Daily Worker and who was an early champion of baseball's integration, have already been elected to the shrine. I think it's fair to say that Rachel Robinson was the most important woman in the history of the major leagues. She didn't own a team. She never covered the game as a reporter. She didn't play the game herself. But as Jackie's partner and as the person who kept alive and has kept alive Jackie's legacy, she's had a significant influence in her own right. Like Jackie, she used her celebrity as a platform to fight for a more fair and equal society. And she has continued Jackie's commitment to pushing Major League Baseball to hire more people of color as managers and as executives. Thanks to Rachel's efforts, most, although not all, unfortunately, of today's Major League players, managers, and executives know that they stand on the shoulders of those like Jackie who came before them and opened the doors for them. Yesterday was Rachel Robinson's 92nd birthday. She's still going strong. She's still a fighter, and she's still speaking out not only about baseball, but about society. If all you know about Rachel Robinson is what you've seen in the 2 Hollywood moving pictures about Jackie, you'd have an incomplete picture of the kind of woman she was and is. She was portrayed by the great Ruby Dee in the 1950 film, The Jackie Robinson Story, where Jackie played himself, and by Nicole Beharie in last year's big hit movie, 42. Both films depict Rachel as Jackie's supporter, cheerleader, and helpmate, the person who comforted him when he faced abuse and encouraged him when he was feeling discouraged. It's all true, but it's incomplete. So let me briefly tell you about this remarkable woman. Rachel Isom was born in 1922 in LA. She grew up in a house on 36th Place on the west side. In the early 1920s, LA was a highly segregated city. It still had restrictive covenants prohibiting the sale of houses to African Americans in certain neighborhoods. To get around that obstacle, Rachel's parents arranged for a light-skinned black person to buy the house and then resell it to them. That was a risky and courageous thing to do at the time, a time when the Ku Klux Klan was quite active here in Los Angeles. Growing up on LA's west side, Rachel faced bigotry on a regular basis. For example, when she and her friends went to the movies, they were regularly directed to sit in the balcony. Even though there was no legal Jim Crow, there was an informal Jim Crow. And by the time Rachel was in high school, her father had to quit his job as a bookbinder for the LA Times, where he'd worked for 25 years because of a chronic heart condition he got as a result of being gassed during World War I. As a result, Rachel's mother had to support the family. She took classes in baking and cake decorating and had her own business catering to rich people in Beverly Hills, Bel Air, and Hollywood. And Rachel worked too. She helped her mother with her catering business. She worked at a concession stand in the LA Public Library, and she sewed baby clothes. She graduated from Manual Arts High School in June of 1940, and that fall she entered UCLA's highly selective and competitive 5-year nursing program. She was a real pioneer. In 1940, this statistic blows my mind, only 5% of all women and only 2% of all black women earned a college degree. But Rachel wasn't about to let those odds get in her way. So she went to UCLA, where she met Jackie in 1941 when they were both students introduced by Ray Bartlett, who many of you know, who grew up with Jackie here in Pasadena. and they were engaged later that year. While at UCLA, Rachel lived at home and commuted to the UCLA campus every day, and she also worked at night. This was during World War II, and local industries were hiring women to do what had previously been considered men's jobs. Rachel was hired as a riveter at the Lockheed Aircraft Factory in LA, where they made airplanes for the war effort. She worked the night shift, and then she drove to UCLA at dawn, and she changed her clothes in the parking lot, and then she went to class. To encourage women to take factory jobs during the war, the federal government created an iconic figure called Rosie the Riveter, whose image adorns this famous poster. But if America hadn't been such a racist and segregated society back then, perhaps the government would have selected another woman to represent the nation's female workers, Rachel the Riveter. So Rachel and Jackie promised their parents that they wouldn't get married until Rachel completed her degree, which she did in June 1945, and they were married the following February. By then, Jackie had already served in the military, played in the Negro Leagues, signed a contract to play with the Montreal Royals in the Dodgers farm system. And 2 weeks after their marriage, Rachel and Jackie left for spring training in Daytona, Florida. And in the show 42, in the movie, they portray the ordeal that the couple faced with the Jim Crow system, including the segregated trains, the buses, the restaurants and the stadiums, and the hostility of many white Southerners. To get to Daytona, they flew from LA to New Orleans, and at the New Orleans airport, they were told they were being bumped, meaning segregated, from the plane to Florida. Jackie protested this obvious act of racism, but he didn't get anywhere, and they had to leave the next day. Meanwhile, Rachel escaped to the ladies' room. But there were two ladies' rooms in the airport, right next to each other. One said colored women, and the other said white women. Rachel went to the one that said white women. People stared at her, but nobody stopped her. So 9 years before Rosa Parks triggered the Montgomery bus boycott, Rachel Robinson had performed her first act of civil disobedience, and it wouldn't be the last. For the next 11 years, until Jackie retired from Major League Baseball in 1957, Rachel and Jackie endured together the humiliations and the bigotry, as well as celebrating the triumphs and the accolades of being civil rights pioneers. Roger Wilkins, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, said this about Rachel, quote, "She was not simply the dutiful little wife. She was Jackie's co-pioneer. She had to live through the death threats, endure the vile screams of the fans, and watch her husband get knocked down pitch by pitch. And because he was under the strictest discipline not to fight, spike, curse, or spit back, she was the one who had to absorb everything he brought home. She was beautiful and wise and replenished his strength and his courage," unquote. In addition, Rachel was responsible for raising their three children, Jackie Jr., Sharon, and David. And while playing for the Dodgers, they lived first in Brooklyn and then on Long Island. And then in 1955, she found a plot of land in Stamford, Connecticut, and they built a new home in that suburban community. But when the news spread that the Robinsons had bought the property, several families on the block sold their homes. The Robinsons nevertheless settled in, became friends with people in the community, became active in the community, but they couldn't escape the racism. When a white friend of theirs attempted to sponsor Jackie at the local country club, he was rejected by a majority vote. He was already a bona fide celebrity, an MVP winner, but the white country clubbers in Stamford didn't think he was good enough to play golf with them. After Jackie retired from baseball in 1957, He began a new career in business and expanded his involvement with the NAACP and the Civil Rights Movement. And then Rachel decided to resume her professional career. This was 5 years before Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, came out. Rachel was an early feminist. As she describes in her book, Jackie Robinson, An Intimate Portrait, Jackie was somewhat upset at first by Rachel's decision to go back to school and to go back to work, but Rachel insisted it was something she had to do, and eventually Jackie came around. So in 1959, at age 37, 14 years after she'd finished nursing school, Rachel was admitted to the graduate program in psychiatric nursing at New York University. And after earning her master's degree, she worked as a nurse therapist and a researcher at Albert Einstein Medical School in New York. And then in 1965, she was hired as a professor at Yale's School of Nursing and at the same time as the nursing director of the Connecticut Mental Health Center. When Rachel was teaching at Yale, the university asked her to join its board of trustees. That's quite a prestigious position. But Rachel said no. She told Yale, quote, "Not unless you put another black or another woman on the board. You won't get a twofer from me." After Jackie's death in 1972 at the age of 53, Rachel took charge of running the Jackie Robinson Development Corporation. And during her 10 years as its president, it built more than 1,300 units of affordable housing. The following year, 1973, she created the Jackie Robinson Foundation. And the foundation is really Jackie's living legacy. And Rachel has been its hands-on chair and its inspiring leader. In its 40 years existence, the foundation has provided scholarships to 1,400 students in college. Each one gets $6,000 a year for 4 years, plus mentoring, plus summer jobs and internships. And the foundation's explicit goal is to help train them to become leaders for social change. Many of them are the first in their families to go to college. Most are students of color. They have a remarkable graduation rate of, get this, 97%. They've gone to Harvard, Yale, Georgetown, UCLA, and many other colleges. And I'm proud to say that a Jackie Robinson scholar graduated from Oxy 2 years ago. In 1997, when the entire country was celebrating the 50th anniversary of Jackie's triumph in breaking baseball's color line, Rachel made sure that the celebration did not divert attention from persistent problems. So when a LA Times reporter asked her if Jackie would be pleased with the status of race relations at the time, she didn't pull any punches. She said, quote, "No, I think he'd be very disturbed about it. We're seeing a great deal of divisiveness, a lot of hatred, a lot of tension between ethnic groups, and I think he'd be disappointed." I think it's fair to say that both Rachel and Jackie were ambivalent about Pasadena. They returned here to visit their family, but they kept their distance. During Jackie's youth growing up here in Pasadena, its black residents were treated like second-class citizens. African Americans faced constant harassment from the police. The local schools, landlords, and employers discriminated against Pasadena's African American residents on a regular basis. For example, in 1936, when Jackie's older brother, Mac, returned to Pasadena after winning a silver medal in the Olympics in Berlin, he couldn't get a job commensurate with his college education at PCC and at the University of Oregon. The only job he could find was as a street cleaner. In the 1940s, Mac joined an effort to push the city to desegregate the public swimming pool at Brookside Park. The pool was open to blacks only once a week, the day before they changed the water. Finally, in 1944, after a judge ordered Pasadena to desegregate the pool, the city retaliated by firing its black employees, including Mac, although he went on to become a juvenile advocate at John Muir High. When Jackie was alive, the Rose Bowl never invited Jackie to be its grand marshal, even though he was the city's most famous native. But in recent years, I think it's fair to say, Pasadena has finally come around and honored the Robinson family in several ways. You all know about the famous 9-foot busts in front of City Hall of Mac and Jackie. The stadium at PCC is dedicated to both Mac and Jackie. The post office has one building named after Mac and one after Jack. Pasadena has a Jackie Robinson Stadium, a Jackie Robinson Park, and a Jackie Robinson Center. And this weekend, Pasadena named it the Robinson Family Weekend, and Friday was the 100th anniversary of Mac's birthday, and on Friday there were 2 ceremonies to honor him and his family. The various places named after Mac and Jackie Robinson help keep their memories alive in their hometown. But this is not sufficient. If you visit Baltimore, you can go to the Babe Ruth Museum. If you visit Royston, Georgia, as I've done because my wife's family's from the South, you can go to the Ty Cobb Museum and see lots of lies about what a humanitarian he was. Even Shoeless Joe Jackson has a museum and a research library dedicated to him in his hometown of Greenville, South Carolina. But what about Pasadena? This city needs a Jackie Robinson Museum. It needs a museum to make sure that the current and future generations of Pasadenans, as well as the many tourists that come here every year, can not only learn about Jackie's remarkable athletic accomplishments, but also about his civil rights activism and about the racism that Jackie and Rachel and Mac and Delano confronted and fought to overcome. I also believe that the Pasadena Public Schools should develop a curriculum as part of its American history lessons that draw on the Robinson family story to teach students about the history of this wonderful city, but also its troubled history of race relations. Without a museum like that, the best way we have to learn about this history, these triumphs and trials, is through the oral tradition, by hearing about it from our community's elders and recording their stories. And one of these people is Delano Robinson. She has lived in Pasadena since 1955 when she and Mac were married. Like Rachel, she was a nurse. She studied nursing at PCC and worked at St. Luke and Huntington Hospitals before retiring in 1988. But she didn't retire as a community activist. Like Rachel, she's been a keeper of the flame, a link between the past and the present. And so I'd like to ask Mrs. Delano Robinson to come up to the stage and accept the plaque on behalf of her sister-in-law, Rachel. Mrs. Robinson.
I'm pleased and so happy, elated to be here to represent and to accept this wonderful award on behalf of my dear sister-in-law, Rachel Robinson. She's a lovely, lovely lady. And there's so many things I can say about her, but I'm gonna break it down as short as I can. I don't want to keep you here all night. But she endured quite a lot of things that Jack had gone through helped to keep him strong and healthy and to be able to be faced with a lot of dignity, no matter how much humiliation that endured in his life when he was playing baseball and breaking the color barrier in baseball. She stood strong and tall and was by his side in the best way most wives would do. I know I did that for Mac. When he was so very ill and died at 85, he was a very sick man, which diabetes was hereditary in the family. He thought he was coming from as an usher from Dodger Stadium. He wanted to be a part of the Dodgers because he said, my brother played with the Dodgers, and when they moved to Los Angeles, he wanted to be a Dodger connection in some way. So they hired him as an usher. And that very afternoon after a day game, he thought he was at home. He had had a massive heart attack and ended up at JPL. 911 calls me and says, maybe you can meet us over at Huntington Emergency. And I said, for what? So what it was, he had had a massive heart attack and he had ended up with a quadruple bypass surgery and a major stroke. I took care of him with my nursing experience for 11 years after he was at Huntington for 3 months. And then 85, he passed on. But still in all, I'm grateful to have been able to use my nursing skills like Rachel used the strength that she had for Jackie, for Mac. And I still had him 11 more years, even though he was a very sick man. Getting back to the story, adding a few edits to previous words being said by the gentleman before me. Rachel was really a strong woman. She endured and with him countless efforts to their dignity. Rachel kept her husband's legacy alive after his premature death. She founded the Jackie Robinson Foundation in New York, which is called the Jackie Robinson Scholarship Foundation in New York, in memory of Jack. And in that foundation, many events raised money, to support scholars in over 100 colleges across the country. The Jackie Robinson Foundation has a graduation rate as of nearly 100% of their scholars. Mac was on the first originality of this foundation at UCLA when it first started. So upon his death, they asked me if I would take his seat. I said, oh, well, let me see. Maybe my children, one of my children might like that experience. So I selected my daughter, Kathy. She's here. To help in the selection of scholars and in the experience for her to find out what goes on. And then the selections committee really was geared toward, and it is geared toward high school graduates. And she would have an experience of being able to hear their grade point averages as to what they are gearing for college education, and with the Jackie Robinson Scholarship and the means of helping to select the right student that would be able to receive this scholarship on the Jackie Robinson Day, which is at Dodger Stadium on April 15th. I believe that is when the new scholars get their scholarship. It is a 4-year scholarship for children of all color. Go to college wherever you wish to go, if you are accepted. They are supported by mentors, sponsors, and friends of the Jackie Robinson Foundation. We want to thank them for their continued support mentors, supporters, corporations, sponsors, and friends of the Jackie Robinson Foundation, and a key to the success of the Jackie Robinson Foundation. Just yesterday, my daughter Kathy welcomed the next class of the 2014 chosen students by the Western Division. There are about, I believe, 4 divisions of the selection of the scholarship selection committee around the country here in America. And she's on the Western Division Advisory Committee to the Jackie Robinson Foundation for choosing and selecting scholars. And they join over more than 1,400 students who call themselves the Jackie Robinson Scholars. And I would just like to read just a little short memo, which is like a telegram that Rachel sent to me. Mac's birthday was on Friday. And I'm very happy that the city of Pasadena and also the Pasadena City College, Dr. Rocha, and along with Mayor Bogart, they helped me to celebrate Mac's centennial birthday. He would have been 100 years old. This is just a little short paragraph Rachel sent to me that she wanted me to read to the people and all the good friends on the audience at the Pasadena City College. Mac and Jack's big brother, and as younger brothers want to do, Jack wanted to be like Mac, to be an athlete like his older sibling, to compete in the world stage. Jack greatly admired Mac, and I did as well. Yes, Mac was an extraordinary athlete, but he was also an extraordinary man who not only faced the fascism of 1936, Berlin, but came home after his silver medal Olympic win to face the racism of wartime in America. Though later shadowed by Jack's barrier-breaking feat of integrating Major League Baseball, Mac's affection to his younger brother remained strong, and through his life, Mac fully supported our efforts to preserve the memory of Jack. Like his younger brother, Mac valued his family, a large brood of 8 children and 25 grandchildren, loved his wife, and worked throughout his life to increase opportunities for young people in his community. Mac stayed in Pasadena because he was concerned about the youth, whereas Jack was on the East Coast playing baseball and traveling with the Dodgers and playing in different cities. He was concerned because back in 1920, when Mrs. Robinson came to Pasadena, she was a lone parent that raised 5 children all by herself. Their father deserted them when they were in Georgia. When she had an opportunity to come and make a better life and find some place to go, she came to Pasadena. Horse and buggy from home with a little raggedy suitcase with 1 or 2 items in it, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to eat on the train. And when they would pass through cities coming toward west, she says the Pullman, when they would stop in towns, would pull down the shades so that the white people would not see that there were colored people on the train, leaving the South, going elsewhere for a better life, or just leaving the South, period. On behalf of Sharon, Rachel's daughter Sharon, and her son David, and all of us on the East Coast and Africa. The youngest son of Jackie's, David, is in the coffee business. He has a Sweeten Farms coffee plantation, I believe, in Tanzania, Africa, imports coffee to this country, America, through his coffee plantation in Africa. We join all the Robinsons in commemorating our beloved Mac on his 100th birthday. And I do want to thank the Baseball Reliquary, kind of like the other young lady. I can't quite pronounce the word, but we looked it up in the dictionary also. Inducting Jackie, Rachel into the baseball, I would say, Shiners Hall of Fame. I just had a birthday July 8th, and I just turned 80, so I can't, I'm a little bit slow on a few things, but retiring from LA County USC Medical Center from Huntington, I've just kind of laid low on my lifestyle. I've had foster children in the home since Mac's death, and I've had daycare for working mothers. And so I'm just kind of staying quiet with my life right now. But I'm very happy, and I appreciate my sister-in-law asking me to stand in for her to receive this award on her behalf. And thank you very much for your
And now we're going to get the piano ready because Betty J. Ford, at the request of the family, is going to perform a brief musical selection. As Peter and Mrs. Robinson have mentioned, today's induction of Rachel Robinson is the concluding event in the City of Pasadena's Robinson Family Weekend, which was launched on Friday with the centennial celebrations for Mac at the Pasadena Robinson Memorial and at Pasadena City College. The Baseball Reliquary extends its appreciation to the Robinson family members in attendance today and all those associated with the City of Pasadena and Pasadena City College for their efforts in making this such a memorable and historic weekend. This concludes today's festivities. A couple of final remarks. The library will close at 5 o'clock, so we have about 40 minutes. We didn't get a chance to mention, but in the east end of the library, in the two wings, the business and humanities wing, and also the Centennial Room, we have a wonderful exhibition of baseball artwork. If you don't get a chance to see it today, it will be up through the end of the month. It's called Live Arms, and it's a terrific show, so please make sure to see that. In the back of the auditorium, we have a few items for sale. We have caps and T-shirts. We have the DVD Not Exactly Cooperstown by John Leonidakis. John has been assisting us today with sound work and everything else, so we appreciate that. And he's also a wonderful filmmaker, and he's made this documentary. Which is being screened at lots of film festivals around the country. So if you are into social media, check the Baseball Reliquary Facebook page, and you can see where that's being screened. Most importantly, we'd like you to join as a member of the Baseball Reliquary. Memberships are $25 per year. And one of the major perks of membership is that you will be allowed to vote in next year's Shrine of the Eternals election and have input and say in terms of this organization making a mark on the cultural and baseball history of the United States. We have some refreshments back there, so please enjoy yourself. And until next year, we bid you a fond farewell.